The audio you're about to hear was recorded in Anchor. Learn more at anchor.fm.
From ScienceSortOf.com, you're listening to Science Sort of.
Hello and welcome to Science Sort of, the podcast that talks about things that are science, things that are sort of science, and things that wish they were science. I'm your host, Ryan. It's been a minute. We've missed you. I've missed you. And let's talk about it. So it's been a few months since we last put out an episode, and I felt really strongly that I wanted to get an episode out before the end of 2021. You're probably listening to this in 2022 because I'm cutting it pretty close to the wire. But just a lot has happened in my life and in the world. And then in the worlds of my co-hosts that have made it tough. And I'm really sorry about that because I'm a podcast fan myself. And I know it's tough when shows go away and there's no explanation and there's no updates. And it's not great to do that to your listeners, to your fans, to your friends that you've made along the way doing a show like this. And I'm sorry about that. It's also hard when people reach out and ask for an explanation because it's embarrassing to say like, hey, yeah, I just haven't for whatever reason had it in me to get another episode out for a while. That said, everyone who reached out in the community reached out in a way that was super kind and had more concern than admonition. And I really appreciate that. And I thank you all for sticking with us. I know myself that when I have a show I really like and they stop releasing content for a little bit, I usually don't unsubscribe. I'll usually wait it out and hope that they come back. And so for those of you who did that, thank you. For those who did, I guess you're not hearing this and that's okay. But a lot has happened in my life. Like I said, there was a move involved and it took me a while to get any sort of studio space set up. There was a baby that arrived that you might be hearing in the background as he fusses a little bit on this New Year's Eve 2021. And you know, work kept me busy and the world continued to kind of fall apart. And so it just made for producing a show that tries to be lighthearted and fun, tough. But that said, I'm feeling undaunted about kicking off the new year right. We actually have a couple episodes already recorded, already edited. All I got to do is get them in the upload queue and hit submit. And so I'm going to work on that so that you will have definitely some consistency in releases coming your way, coming down the pike, as they say. And this episode 2, I think, is a good one to sort of end the year on. It is... the theme, I guess I should say, is Anchors Away Part 5, the final anchoring. And it is a compilation, a clip show of the show that I did for Anchor.fm, which was called Organized Curiosity. And these are the last episodes that I produced for that channel. I've actually been looking into it a little bit, and it looks like the original concept behind Anchor was that you would release the content and it would be available for 24 hours and it would go away. And now that they've been acquired by Spotify and they're more of a traditional podcasting production platform, I believe that functionality has changed and it's more like a traditional podcast episode that just is available. And I think I can actually re-release all the episodes that I did for them as its own feed that would go up on iTunes and Spotify and all the other places. So that's kind of cool. And I am going to work on that in the new year. So maybe I'm not promising that Organized Curiosity will come back, but if I get some feedback that people might enjoy a separate feed with little one-off mini episodes from me, that's something I will consider. In the meantime, there's actually some cool stuff in this episode. So I talk a little bit about the fishing cat, which is one of the more unique cats out there. I know unique is not technically supposed to be a modifier, but just go with me on it. I talk about the Drake equation and the Fermi paradox, and that's just in the first half. And I will save what I talk about in the second half for I'll give you a little teaser of that. Oh, I also talk about Zootopia. I debunk a children's movie because who wouldn't want to hear that? If Brian Dunn's not going to do it on Skeptoid, I'm going to do it here. So That's coming up in the first half. I'll pop in midway through with the traditional drink segment, and then we'll go on to the second half and a little bit of listener feedback, and then we will call it a year, and I will see you on the other side in 2022. All right, thanks again for sticking with us. Here are the clips. Hello and welcome to Organized Curiosity, the Anchor Science Station dedicated to cataloging everything we know about the natural world for your edutainment. I'm your host, Ryan Haupt, and it's time to debunk a children's cartoon. That's right, I watched Zootopia the other night because I'm an adult man, and shut up, you don't know my life. Now, before you turn this off because you think I'm about to rant about the scientific accuracy of a children's movie about cartoon animals, give me a chance. Believe it or not, even as a scientist who believes in basically nothing, I still managed to have joy in my life. So I did enjoy the movie and thought it had a nice message about inclusivity and understanding. And now you're waiting for the but, right? Well, here it is. But there was one scene, and really only one, that gave me pause. Early in the film, Jason Bateman's Fox character is selling popsicles out of a cart. Early in the film, Jason Bateman's Fox character is selling popsicles out of a cart. He posts up outside a Lemming bank. Once a Lemming veers out of line to get a popsicle, the rest follow and the Fox makes a quick buck. Because, as we all know, Lemmings are stupid, mindless rodents that will fall to their deaths because all they know how to do is follow the Lemming in front of them. Insert buzzer sound here because that's not true. Can you guess where that lie you've been thinking your entire life came from? I'll give you a hint. It's the same studio that made Zootopia. That's right, Disney. The myth originated in the Academy Award-winning documentary in quotes, White Wilderness. Do we have a clip? Hey, for once we actually have a clip.
In this land of many mysteries, it's a strange fact that the largest legends seem to collect around the smallest creatures. One of these is a mousy little rodent called the Lemming. Here's an actual living legend. For it's said of this tiny animal that it commits mass suicide by rushing into the sea in droves. The story is one of the persistent tales of the Arctic, and as often happens in man's nature lore, it's a story both true and false, as we shall see in a moment. Ahead lies the Arctic shore, and beyond, the sea. And still the little animals surge forward. Their frenzy takes them tumbling down the terraced cliffs, creating tiny avalanches of sliding soil and rocks. And seemingly indestructible lemmings, they reach the final precipice. This is the last chance to turn back. Yet over they go, casting themselves bodily out into space. All seem to survive the ordeal, for now they begin to swim. Not toward land, strangely, but away from shore, toward the far horizon. Others find the beaches by roundabout ways, and they too plunge into the waves. It's not given to man to understand all of nature's mysteries, but as nearly as he can surmise, it would appear that the lemmings consider this body of water just another lake. And if it's a lake, then it must have a farther shore. And so they strike out boldly. But gradually, strength wanes. Determination ebbs away. And soon the Arctic Sea is dotted with tiny, bobbing bodies. And so is acted out the legend of mass suicide and destruction of a species it would seem to be. Except that nature, in her infinite wisdom, has spared a few. Back on the Arctic plain, there remains the small handful that did not make this fatal journey. And in time, new generations will take the place of those that have been lost. And yet, when the population cycle mounts to another peak, the lemming legend will be told again, and will come to this same amazing climax, a final rendezvous with destiny and with death.
The narrator does a pretty good job of saying what you'd be seeing on the screen, but what you see on the screen was carefully filmed, edited, and even staged to make it look like what the narrator was saying was true. The film was shot in Alberta, Canada, which is landlocked, so the shots of the water are the Bow River, not the Arctic Sea. So the whole thing is just nonsense. Lemmings are not mindless followers that commit suicide on a whim. According to the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, they think the idea behind the myth came from lemming dispersal and migration. Rodents breed very quickly, so their populations are in constant flux based on predators, food, weather, etc. If a lemming population explodes locally in one area, lemmings will distribute outwards to new areas, including crossing bodies of water. Some lemmings will die as part of this dispersal, but that's not the same thing as an intentional suicide to keep the population in check. If the joke was slipped into Zootopia as a subtle dig at Disney themselves, I get it and think it's kind of funny, but it's perpetuating a poor understanding of these animals, so I had to speak up. If you've recently watched something intended for children and have strong scientific opinions about it, please call into the station. I appreciate any applause or echoes, and make sure you favorite this station to get more of my gentle rants in your ears every single day. Thanks for listening. Be sure to stay curious out there. There's a lot to learn. Hello and welcome to Organized Curiosity. This is a bit of a combo, bio, and news you probably cannot use, because I saw recently that the fishing cat, one of my personal favorite felids, has slunk out of existence in Southeast Asia. So this is what we call a local extinction, where the animal's alive in some parts of its range, but not its entire historical range. And so I wanted to take this opportunity to highlight the fishing cat, Prionailurus viverrinus. This is a really cool, medium-sized cat. It's about 65 to 85 centimeters long and can be between 6 and 12 kilograms. They live in Southeast Asia, as I mentioned, and they really love the water. So there's this persistent myth that cats don't like being in the water, but there's actually plenty of cat species out there that are just fine in the water. Jaguars are fine, tigers are fine, lots of smaller cats, including this fishing cat, don't mind going for a swim. What's somewhat unique about this particular cat is that when this cat interacts with the water, it's actually trying to get food. They're largely nocturnal, and they're really good swimmers. They can actually dive under the water for fish, but they can also stand at the water's edge and scoop fish out of the water with their paws. They also eat other things that live in the water besides fish, like frogs, crustaceans, snakes, birds, and they'll go after opportunistically available mammals and scavenge on carcasses of larger animals when they come across them. Now, one thing I think is really fascinating about this cat is it is one of the only cats out there that will feed on hard objects. The term for this is durophagy, so you can think of it as like the consumption of something that's very durable. Crustaceans I mentioned, also mollusks, and so these things with shells, you have to crack them open, and unless you're an otter and can use tools, you have to rely on your teeth. They tend to breed in the spring and have litters of 1 to 4 kittens after a gestation of 63 days. Young nurse with mom for about 6 months and become independent at about 10 months. In captivity, males have actually been observed helping out raising the kittens, which is a pretty rare behavior for cats. Typically, they're solitary, and the males and females only really interact with each other during breeding season and don't hang out after birth. They can live for an average of 12 years, but in captivity a bit longer, up to 15. And you actually can see these things in zoos around the US. I know that the National Zoo in DC has at least 2, and they're really cool to go and watch in their habitat. So as I kind of mentioned at the top of this segment, they have a discontinuous distribution, which means that the population is now separated into subgroups instead of one continuous range. Obviously, being able to move around their entire habitat is preferable because it means the genetic diversity of the species can stay at an appropriate level. Once you start fragmenting up the population, you can lead to genetic problems. We've seen this in particular with the very small mountain lion populations of South Florida and Texas. They've had some genetic defects because they're not able to breed with the rest of the species in other parts of the US. The current efforts to document these animals have changed their conservation status. So sometimes a conservation status is based on whatever meager data that we have. And in the case of the fishing cat, it was listed as endangered based on what we thought we knew. And now more recent work has come out showing that in the areas where they're not locally extinct, they're actually kind of doing okay. So its status was changed to vulnerable, which is less severe than endangered, which might have some people confused. But what it means is we have better information on the cats where they are currently extant, which is the opposite of extinct. But we do know now more definitively areas where they are extinct, which include places like Indonesia, where they haven't been observed since 1990. This is at least the third impressive impressive cat to go extinct in this area, 2 subspecies of tiger also went extinct in the 1900s. The problem is coming from wetland destruction, with over 50% of Asian wetlands under threat or disappearing as a result of human settlement, drainage for agriculture, pollution, excessive hunting, and wood cutting. Overfishing, as you can also imagine, is not great for these animals because you're taking away their food. Additionally, fishing cats are sometimes also hunted to be eaten for supposed medical properties that they very likely do not have, and for thinking that they are a pest that is capable of killing and eating domesticated stock animals. The skin of the animal, like a lot of cats, has also been observed in Asian markets, but not as frequently as some of the more spectacularly pelted cats out there. So that's about all I have to say about the fishing cat. I wish I had better news. I hate it when things go extinct locally because that's a really big hurdle to overcome to get the animals back to the range they should be in. I nearly forgot that in this segment, whenever an animal makes a noise, I will do my best to track down that vocalization and play it for you guys. The fishing cat kind of sounds like it's chuckling or barking a little bit, and it's frankly quite creepy. So enjoy. Be sure to favorite this station to keep getting content like this, and I always appreciate call-ins, echoes, applauses, all that fun stuff, so let's all keep in touch, and please make sure to stay curious out there because there's a lot to learn. Welcome to Organized Curiosity, your anchor science station dedicated to bringing you everything we know about the natural world for your edutainment. We've been harping a lot on biology and fossils and things of that nature, so let's get our head back in the stars and talk about space for a second. I want to talk about the Drake equation, which is an argument developed in 1961 by Dr. Frank Drake that is aimed at estimating the number of active communication-enabled extraterrestrial civilizations in our galaxy. I'll read out the equation and then I will explain what each of the terms means and talk about some of the usefulness and proposed modifications, and then finally, of course, we have to end in the estimates, right? The equation is n equals r with an asterisk times f sub p times n sub e times f sub l times f sub I times f sub c times capital L. All right, so the n that the equation is multiplying to find is the number of civilizations in our galaxy with which it might be possible to communicate. R is the average rate of star formation in our galaxy. F sub p is the fraction of those stars that might have planets. N sub e is the average number of planets that could potentially support life per star that has planets. F sub L is the fraction of planets that could support life that actually develop life at some point. F sub I is the fraction of planets with life that actually go on to developing intelligent life and subsequently civilizations based around that intelligent life. F sub C is the fraction of civilizations that develop a technology that releases detectable signs of their existence into space. And L is the length of time for which such civilizations release detectable signals into space. So the lifespan of a communicative civilization. In other words, how long does a society last before it obliterates itself, which is a little pessimistic, but it's included in the equation. So the problem here is that the last 4 parts of the equation, the number of planets that develop life, the number of planets that have intelligent life, the number of civilizations that develop technology, and the length of time those civilizations lasts, are not known in any way and very hard to estimate. So you can have arguments for really long-lasting civilizations, or you can have arguments for very short civilizations. You can argue that lots of planets develop life, but intelligent life is relatively rare. And because our only example we have to work with right now is Earth, we don't really have enough data to guess what those numbers might be for other parts of the galaxy. We have gotten much better at calculating things like star formation and planets, detecting those planets, detecting planets that could potentially support life. So the original calculations made back in the 1960s have changed significantly as our ability to measure those things has increased. Now, since this equation was first proposed, some modifications have been suggested that might help give a better estimate of the number of alien civilizations out there. One is the concept of colonization. So the idea that an advanced enough civilization might colonize other planets, and so you might actually have a higher number of colonized planets where life didn't necessarily evolve in the first place, but was moved there purposefully with the use of technology, which would also change the lifetime survival of that technologically advanced society because they'd be on multiple planets. So if one planet gets destroyed or ruined or whatever, you've got backups. There's also something called the reappearance factor, which is how many times an intelligent civilization might occur on planets where it has already happened once. So like if humanity went extinct tomorrow, but millions of years in the future, some other organism has evolved to take our place as a technologically enabled society that could communicate with future aliens. So kind of like a Planet of the Apes scenario. Another factor was proposed called the METI factor, which is messaging to extraterrestrial intelligence, which basically is an estimate of whether or not technologically capable aliens would transmit signals out into the stars on purpose. So our earliest transmissions out into space that would be powerful enough to reach other stars were not done on purpose. It was just the technology had gotten powerful enough to broadcast those signals. Now we have the option of projecting signals out into space, but there are risk factors to consider. Are we inviting problems by being a noisy neighbor in a galactic sense? So it's possible that alien civilizations, if they evolved, might be a little bit more paranoid, might be a little bit more insular, and might not want to broadcast in a way where other alien civilizations could pick up on them. And finally, an astronomer proposed a revised equation which focuses on looking at planets within habitable zones of stars and look at the atmosphere of those planets to see if we can detect gases that are indicators of sources of life. So for example, something like methane is a short-lived gas in the atmosphere. It decays pretty rapidly, but is replenished here on Earth because there are life processes that produce methane and emit it into the atmosphere, so like cow farts. And so essentially what this astronomer said is, let's look for pollution, and pollution would be a sign of life, which is kind of a funny and probably would work way of doing things. The original estimates, using a range of values for a couple of the different parameters, originally gave Frank Drake a minimum of 20 civilizations in the galaxy and a maximum of 50 million. But because of the uncertainties, Drake usually said that there were about 1,000 to 100,000. So that was in 1961. Since then, we've updated those parameters based on science, and a more recent estimate actually puts it at 156 million intelligent civilizations out there. So that's a lot of civilizations. I mean, granted, there are many, many more stars in the Milky Way than that, but it still seems like it's kind of a crowded place, which is where we come to one of the most interesting criticisms of this method, which I will get to in my next segment. All right, see you over there. Talking about the Drake equation today on Organized Curiosity, and I ended the last segment talking about the current estimates, which put roughly 156 million civilized planets in the galaxy, which is a pretty big number, and that brings us to some of the criticisms of this method. So the obvious criticism is we're making a lot of assumptions about how commonly life might evolve on other planets, how commonly intelligence arises from that life, and then once that intelligence arises, do they ever develop technology that's capable of being seen by us from our vantage point here on Earth? So the criticism of those assumptions, I think, is totally valid, but what proponents of the Drake equation will say is that, yeah, we're speculating, but we're also just trying to kind of have a discussion. Like, we're trying to get people thinking about this topic and stimulate some dialogue and talk about reasonable and maybe some unreasonable ways we could try to make contact with potential extraterrestrial civilizations out there. Then there's the Fermi paradox, which is not a true paradox, but really just a pessimistic argument against the Drake equation, and it supposedly came about during the Manhattan Project when Enrico Fermi, who was a brilliant Italian physicist who helped work on the Manhattan Project to develop the atomic bomb at the end of World War II, supposedly went into the cafeteria one day to have lunch and sat down with a group of other scientists who were talking passionately about how probable it was that there were alien civilizations out there just waiting to be contacted. And Fermi's response was, well, if the galaxy is so full of life, then where the hell is it?
basically saying that if these civilizations were out there, we should have seen them by now, especially operating under the assumption that life has a tendency to fill up all available territory in space. So as soon as aliens develop the ability to travel from planet to planet and star to star, then they should be everywhere. Whether or not this conversation ever actually happened, it is interesting food for thought and was kind of cleverly flipped on its head in the comic The Manhattan Project by Jonathan Hickman, in which it is revealed that Enrico Fermi was actually an alien secretly living on Earth himself. So his question was very tongue-in-cheek because he was sitting right in front of them. One of the explanations put out there to explain the Fermi paradox is that maybe the lifetime of the civilization, which is one of the estimates that we really don't have any good idea of in the Drake equation, maybe the lifetime is really, really short. If the lifetime is really, really short, then there's just not enough time for any two civilizations out there in the galaxy to overlap, especially given the interstellar distances where things might take hundreds to thousands of years to get signals back and forth. Well, what this ignores is that we as humans have launched spacecraft out into interstellar space at this point. The Voyager spacecrafts are on their way out of the solar system. The exact barrier for where the solar system begins and ends at its boundaries are a little bit fuzzy, but they're going out there. And so those craft, assuming they don't fall into a black hole or fall into a sun or get hit by some crazy interstellar object, they're going to be the symbol of humanity and what we accomplished millennia from now when we are potentially all gone and extinct. So because of that idea, Seth Shostak, who is the senior astronomer for SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, suggested that we might not find living alien civilizations out there, but we might find the technology that they built and distributed throughout the galaxy in the form of things like probes and maybe even artificial intelligence. So it's possible that when we find aliens, they're going to be robots that were built by aliens that are now extinct. Of course, it's always possible, however improbable, that we are in a cosmic zoo and the aliens are observing us laughing at our attempts to try to find them while waiting for us to destroy ourselves with nukes. So there's an optimistic note to end on, but seriously, even though this isn't the kind of science that I do, which hope also serves as a disclaimer for anything I might have gotten wrong here, I do love thinking about this stuff. I do love talking about this stuff. So call into this station if you have your own opinion on the Drake equation or the Fermi paradox or life out there in the stars. Be sure to favorite this station to hear more segments like this, and remember to stay curious because there's a lot to learn out there. I mean, there's things we haven't even learned yet. Like, we don't even know if there's aliens yet. It's an open question. So let's get to work, team. Come on. Let's go find them. Let's go find those aliens. Or maybe we don't want to find those aliens. I don't know.
Well, it would not be an episode of Science Sort of if we didn't also talk about what we are drinking. The we in this case is just me. I'm not alone in my house, but I am alone in this room in the moment that I am recording this. Clementine was here while I was recording the intro, but left in between the intro and me recording this. So just me. Today I am having an Imperial IPA. So I thought, if people were nervous that the show had lost a step and that we weren't planning on getting back to what the show was, well, there's always going back to the well of an Imperial IPA. This one is from Country Boy Brewing in Georgetown, Kentucky, and it's called their Knotty Pine Double IPA with Maris Otter malt and West Coast hops. And it is, this is, I think, one of my favorite breweries to come out of the Southeast in a little while, especially Kentucky. And it is usually only available to me when I'm in West Virginia for work. But whenever I see their stuff, I usually snag it because it tends to be very, very good. They have a pecan brown ale. I think it's called Shotgun Wedding. Excellent, excellent beer. But this one is very good too. So that is what I am enjoying today. So the second half of the clips for this episode are actually pretty cool. Probably should have released this episode closer to Halloween, but they're all about the Night Hag or sleep paralysis syndrome, starting off with a story told by Jordan Peele, of all people, and wrapping up with my own experiences and some of the science and how the science of the Night Hag syndrome or sleep paralysis ties into alien abduction. So if that all sounds interesting to you, please stay tuned and enjoy.
Hello and welcome to Organized Curiosity, the anchor science station dedicated to bringing you everything we know about the natural world for your edutainment. I'm your host, Ryan Haupt, and after yesterday's discussion of the Drake equation and the Fermi paradox, I wanted to maybe talk about aliens a little bit closer to home. And I want to talk about this because I saw a friend post a story on Facebook recounting a part of an interview with Jordan Peele, director of Get Out and member of Key and Peele, the hilarious sketch comedy show. Here's the quote from Jordan Peele. I want to believe in ghosts. I love ghost stories. We were shooting Keanu in New Orleans, and the whole cast went on this ghost tour led by this sexy, swarthy guy. Like, if these stories could talk, they'd tell you some pretty scary stories, but you probably don't want to hear about that. I was looking over at Method Man like, oh my god, I brought a member of the Wu-Tang Clan to this ghost tour. He's going to hate it. At the end of the tour, Method Man raises his hand, and I was like, oh, here it comes. He goes, sometimes I wake up and feel something sitting on my chest. What is it? And I'm thinking, it's blunts, stop smoking blunts. But the tour guide is like, that's gonna be a Night Hag. What does this have to do with aliens? Well, keep listening. The Night Hag or Old Hag is a fantasy creature from folklore, and it's kind of a worldwide phenomenon. And the reason it's a worldwide phenomenon is because it is actually the product of a condition in the brain that happens in some people in between being asleep and being awake. The word nightmare, which we would use to describe a bad dream, actually comes from an old hag type syndrome because in Scandinavian folklore, the condition that causes the old hag to appear was called a mare, not like a female horse, but a demon supernatural creature related to things like incubi and succubi, and so to have one of these creatures attack you in the night would be a nightmare. This is famously depicted in the painting of the same name, The Nightmare, by Henry Fuseli in 1781, where a woman appears to be kind of hanging off of the bed she's sleeping on with a little goblin man sat on her abdomen and the head of a horse sticking its head through curtains. It's a very Twin Peaks-esque scenario and actually has some basis in fact. So for today's segments, I'll be talking about the scientific reason behind what's going on here and some of the cultural ramifications for what that means in human society. So the scientific name for the night hag phenomenon is called sleep paralysis, and it can happen either when you're falling asleep or as you're waking up. And what it consists of is an inability to move, speak, or really react to anything that's happening. The state of being is also accompanied by terrifying hallucinations, which can involve simulacra of people or supernatural creatures, including those that attempt to suffocate or pin down the individual by applying an enormous amount of pressure to the chest. So obviously this is a really terrifying thing to experience, which is why it is often reported as being accompanied by a feeling of absolute dread. Just so you don't think I'm talking outside of school, I will use the next segment to talk about my own experience with this exact phenomenon, and that's coming up in just a second. Welcome to Organized Curiosity, and today we're talking about nightmares, and in order to speak on sleep paralysis, I wanted to quickly recap my own experience with the phenomenon just so anything I say about it is known to be coming from a place of this has happened to me before. Very simply, I had kind of a classic version of this phenomenon where I was asleep, I was lying supine, so flat on my back, which as I learned is the sleeping position most often associated with this phenomenon. And I awoke in that my eyes opened and I was aware that I was in my room lying on my bed, but I was completely unable to move. I don't remember feeling the immense pressure on the chest, but I definitely remember the feeling of dread. And the door to my bedroom was open. I was sleeping alone that night, and I remember a shadow being, shadow entity, shadow person walk through the door of my bedroom, which would have been off of my left shoulder, and then walk around to the foot of my bed, and then stand on the foot of my bed, and then lean over my body. But the whole time, I was unable to even scream or do anything to react to the scenario. All in all, that's a really, really classic version of this type of phenomenon. And as soon as I came out of the experience and was fully awake and could move again, I was aware that that was what had happened to me, because I was fortunate enough to have heard of this phenomenon before. So I didn't have to come up with any alternative explanations. I knew that I had just experienced sleep paralysis. And while in the moment it was terrifying, I was able to think through it upon waking fully in a way where, while it was scary, I didn't ascribe anything other than a sort of brain blip, which is really what it is. It's probably the second most scared I've ever been in my own memory. The first most was the time a moose decided to charge me, but that's a story for a different day. So that was my experience with sleep paralysis. And in my next segment, I'm going to talk a little bit about what exactly the root cause of what just happened to me was. And then after that, we're going to talk a little bit about the cultural ramifications of what that means. I want to talk about what might be some of the root cause of what's causing this really, really terrifying phenomenon for some people. There's possibly a genetic component, so it could be that if your parents experienced sleep paralysis, you might be more prone to it. But the most common root cause I've often heard attributed to this phenomenon is sleep deprivation. So ironically, not getting a good night's sleep can actually lead to you having really, really horrifying waking nightmares, which seems kind of unfair. Like, you're already tired. Just get a good night's sleep. It's also been linked to disorders such as narcolepsy, migraines, stress, anxiety disorders, and obstructive sleep apnea. So all things that would make it harder for you to go to sleep, except for narcolepsy. The mechanism that seems to result in this phenomenon is disruptive REM sleep. REM stands for rapid eye movement, which is one of the 4 stages of sleep, and it's the stage which is most commonly associated with dreaming. So your eyes are moving around because your brain is active in a way where you're experiencing a dream state, and your eyes are actually moving around to look around that dream state. And those rapid eye movements are caused by muscles around your eyes firing to move your eyes in different directions. It would be really bad if the rest of your body reacted that same way to a dream state. If you're familiar with the comedian Mike Birbiglia, he has a very funny bit on this that he actually turned into a feature-length film called Sleepwalk with Me, where he suffers from a condition where his body doesn't paralyze during this stage of sleep. And so whatever he's dreaming, his body is working itself through the motions in kind of an extreme sleepwalking where he's running around, jumping, climbing on things, and the like. And that's not a good place to be in. So it's actually a good thing during REM sleep for your body to go into paralysis. The problem comes when your brain reawakens from that state. But the problem with sleep paralysis is your brain wakes up, but your body is still in that paralytic state that is induced during REM sleep. The state usually only lasts for a few seconds to a few minutes, but it can seem like it lasts a lot longer. People report audio and visual hallucinations associated with this state, including out-of-body experiences. So it's really, really creepy to have happen to you. I'm in no way trying to diminish the complete sense of corporeal betrayal that comes with this state, but it is something that, while science is still working to fully understand it, does seem to have a pathophysiological explanation. So there's a lot of potential explanations for what's causing sleep paralysis. It could be something that's happening entirely within the brain. So like body image distortion, which comes from the parietal and temporal junction of the brain, which is the part of the brain that's associated with you knowing where your own body is. And if that part of the brain sort of misfires during that transition from being asleep to being awake, you might have this weird out-of-body experience because your brain is suddenly confused as to where your body is supposedly existing, which could also explain why you have these other human-shaped beings in the area. It's your brain kind of displacing your own personal sense of self into a different section of the room, which is really, really creepy, but still all happening in the brain. And the fear that's induced by that could also lead to that feeling of chest pressure and not being able to breathe. It's also possible that in some deeper part of our midbrain, which is the part of a brain that is considered more basal, I hate to use the term less evolved, but it's a more primitive part of our brain where you're always kind of looking out for threats. And so it's possible that that part of the brain is causing the intruder hallucination, because when we're asleep, we're especially vulnerable to attack. That's sort of a non-issue in most first world countries with locks and doors and security systems, but you have to remember that our brains evolved in a situation where there were actual predators that could come and get us at any time. And so your fight or flight response is really more attuned to those situations than to the modern world. And it's possible that that hypervigilance causes you to overreact to minor stimuli in your environment while you're asleep. And so it tries to wake you up to make you less vulnerable, but something just goes wrong and you get this helplessness where you can't move for a few seconds until your body fully comes out of that state. So super scary, not fun at all to experience. The best treatment that most people can get for this is to just have good sleep habits. Try to go to sleep at the same time every night. Try to sleep in places where you feel very safe and secure. Try to make sure you're getting enough sleep. And if you're still experiencing consistent sleep paralysis and the associated hallucinations, you probably do need to go see a physician to possibly get treated with antidepressants or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which are called SSRIs. I'm not prescribing those to you. I'm saying if you can't get over these experiences and can't stop them from happening, there are potentially ways to deal with them that might provide some relief. I say this because having experienced it, I know how really, really scary it can be. Fortunately, it's only happened to me once in my own memory, but it did bring into sharp contrast some of the cultural ramifications that this condition has caused in people over time. We're going to talk about that next. For me, one of the most interesting things about the Night Hag sleep paralysis syndrome is that there's a cultural component to it. So if you're raised in an environment where you believe that there are beings in the night out to get you, incubi, succubi, old hags, nightmares, demons, goblins, or aliens, then that's what you might see when this condition affects you. So for me, the most relevant modern context for this is the alien abduction mythology. You're lying in bed, you're awoken by a noise or a light, there are strange beings in the room that you can't quite make out, you can't move, and then a bunch of terrifying stuff happens. Okay, that's a classic description of an alien abduction scenario, but also a classic description of sleep paralysis. If you're raised in the atomic age or later, with all the UFO sightings and the alien abduction mythology, it doesn't take much to prime you to think that that's what's happening to you in the moment you're experiencing that thing. So one of the things that people who claim to be abducted by aliens have cited in support of the legitimacy of their claims is that there is consistency between all of the reports of people who claim to be abducted. This seems like the crux of their argument, but this is also where it kind of falls apart, because in my mind, it is more likely that they're all experiencing the same thing because humans all have roughly the same brains. It doesn't take very much tweaking of our neural chemistry or architecture to create some pretty dramatic effects that seem very real to the person experiencing them, but are obviously all within the neural network of that person and not actually existing in the real world. That's not to dismiss the experiences. I don't want anyone to feel abandoned or like they don't have any recourse. I just think that it's all coming internally rather than externally. And I think that that's a really fascinating place to be, because that, to me, explains the worldwide phenomenon of paralytic vampires and aliens with paralysis beams and succubi and old hags. And rather than divide us into groups that have had magical or psychotechnological experiences from aliens, we're all just humans with brains that have evolved over the millennia that are built to deal with certain kinds of situations. And so when we put them in a modern context, sometimes they just break in really weird, scary, and frankly interesting ways. So I hope that these segments haven't induced sleep paralysis in anyone. I'm looking forward to a good night's sleep tonight. If you've experienced sleep paralysis and had a radically different experience, please call in and tell us about it. And if this unfortunately has induced it in you, I also apologize for that, and call in and yell at me, because that'll be weird. There are folks out there who think that this is a condition that can be transmitted just by telling other people about it. And I don't believe that, so I didn't put a disclaimer, but hey, let's call it a scientific experiment. So thanks for listening to my station. Be sure to favorite it for more content like this. And I appreciate you all listening. I'm Ryan Haupt. I'll see you next time. And remember to stay curious out there, because there is a lot to learn.
So that wraps up all of the content that I produced for Anchor.fm back in the early days of its inception before it was acquired by Spotify, back when it was its own independent little startup. And I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, please let me know. Reach out to me either on Twitter at Halped or at Science Sort of, or Facebook or any of the other social media platforms. PaleoPOWs at ScienceSortOf.com or Ryan at ScienceSortOf.com are both ways to reach me via email. And if I get enough feedback, I really will consider doing more, because I did enjoy doing it. It's a very different type of content than this show, and really kind of forced me to flex my muscles a little bit in a different way that I found enjoyable. But it sort of ran its course, and these startup infancy where things are a little tumultuous and there's a lot of trying something and then trying something else, and it just it ended up kind of getting shuffled around in their internal restructuring before I think the app even really went live. So that's my journey with Anchor, and now the Anchor can truly be said to be away. And I know that that's the improper use of Anchor's away. it's a homophone in that sense, but I addressed that in a previous episode, so go check that out if you want to understand my completely made up explanation for why I structured the themes that way, because I got it wrong and then had to make up an excuse as to why. So if you do give me feedback that you liked the content I was producing for Anchor in that organized curiosity sort of way, that feedback will more likely get featured in a future organized curiosity episode, but it's possible that it would get featured here in our final segment that we like to call the PaleoPOW. And I'm just going to go straight into it. No music cutaway. How about that? So, sorry, Clem just came in to grab her peanut butter filled Kong and run away. That's what that noise was. So I have an email from Brandon M, who says, "Hi, I started listening to Science Sort of earlier this year and I love it. I've been working my way through the back catalog and I'm now close to episode 100. Now, Brandon, I will let you know that we do like it when people tell us their particular method for how they're moving through the back catalog. So if you want to follow up with that, that would be fantastic." Anyway, the email continues. "I've been listening on Stitcher and trying to play some of your other shows like the Collapse Wave Function and Technically Speaking, but I can't seem to stream them or play them once they've been downloaded. Maybe you could help. Anyway, Science Sort of has been everything I didn't know I needed in a podcast, and thank you and the other PaleoPOWs for making it." Well, thank you so much, Brandon, for those kind words. It means a lot. I believe that because the Collapse Wave Function and Technically Speaking are no longer using their original RSS feed, that you wouldn't be able to get them from Stitcher. So even if it says that it's available, it's not actually going to be able to download that file. So I think that's the issue you're running into. All of Technically Speaking is available on SoundCloud for free on our SoundCloud page. So go check it out over there, and hopefully you won't have any issues getting the content that way. Collapse Wave Function, I am also working to get uploaded to our SoundCloud. We had a little bit of an issue with some lost files that I had to figure out how to recover with Chad, so we did that as well. I believe the Weekly Wienersmith should all still be available in its original feed, but if it's not, please let me know and I'll work on that as well. There's also a couple episodes of a podcast called Astrarium that we had in the network for a little bit that was quite good, that I think I do need to get back up onto SoundCloud, so I guess you can't check that out yet, but I will work on that. Lots of things to do for the new year. Sorry this year didn't end up being a great year for the podcast. I don't feel great about it, but I feel surprisingly optimistic about the year ahead. The 2 episodes we've already recorded are super fun. And in my head, when I told myself I was going to do a clip show, that was months ago at this point, and I was like, oh, those are relatively easy to produce because all I have to do is drag and drop the right files in the right order, record these little bits, and export it, and I'm done. And then I thought that would give me a buffer between the episodes that we were planning on recording, which are recorded and edited and ready to go. And I don't know, it just, something got in my head that like, man, maybe this style of episode sucks. Maybe this content isn't that interesting. Maybe people don't want to hear an entire episode of just me. And it with everything that was happening in the year and all the stress of the pandemic and moving house and having a kid, I think I just got completely in my own way about putting content out there that I'd literally already put out. And that's silly and stupid, but, I guess we're all a work in progress, and it's never too late to pull the Band-Aid off and actually throw this episode out into ether and hope that it's still what some people are interested in listening to. And if it's not, we already have more episodes recorded, so those are coming. And yeah, I guess that's just kind of the message I want to end the year on is I hope you all are doing okay. I'm sorry we didn't produce more content for y'all this year. This might have been a year that folks really needed it. We might have been healthier mentally if we had, but we just we couldn't get there. And I think we can. I think we will rise like a phoenix from the ashes. And I just want to thank everyone who did stick with us for sticking with us. We're still on Patreon, patreon.com/sciencesortof, but obviously we've got a little bit of work to do to get that back up to its full potential and meeting the promises that were made on that front. So that's another on the to-do list for 2022. So thank you again, everyone, for listening. This has been the final Anchor's Way episode, and it's the final Science Sort of the year. So we will be back next year in 2022 with a whole lot more science. Sort of.
Visit sciencesortof.com for show notes, links to all the stories we talked about, and ways to interact with the hosts, guests, and other listeners. Science Sort of is brought to you by the Brachiolope Media network of podcasts, with audio engineering by Tim Dobbs of the Encyclopedia Brunch podcast. That's all for this week. See you next time on Science Sort of.
Okay, everyone. Let's try this one last time.